is not the most stable connection either, but we will move forward and endeavor to make this work. As I said, yesterday, in parts of the United States, there was absolutely hammered by tornadoes. Please pray for those affected by it. And here in the Great Plains, Oklahoma, Kansas, and a few other places, it looks like starting today is going to be our turn. Please pray for us, and it is appreciated. Now, you might have been aware that yesterday the Holy Father gave an address to the diplomatic corps of the Vatican. He caused international headlines with the content of his address. What he had to say was basic Catholic stuff, but the media response was revealing in a subtle kind of way. You could tell they were seething when they were writing this stuff, but there weren't headlines or articles dragging him through the mud for what he said, at least not yet. Rather, there was a subtle attempt to delegitimize Pope Leo XIV by constantly comparing him to Pope Francis, who was the darling of the media and of Hollyweird. You'll see this in the responses from mainstream media I have for you here, but also he did rile up the activist media who are focused on that sin that Father James Martin F.J. has an unhealthy interest in for a priest. Let's go over all of that today, starting with the Holy Father's address to the diplomatic corps. This is an important address that he gave. It does help set the tone for his papacy. It's short, too. Your Eminence, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, peace be with you. I thank His Excellency Mr. George Pulides, Ambassador of the Republic of Cyprus and Dean of the Diplomatic Corps, for his cordial greeting in your name and for the tireless work that he has carried out with his characteristic energy, commitment, and kindness. These qualities have earned him the esteem of all my predecessors whom he has met in these years of his mission to the Holy See, particularly the late Pope Francis. I would also like to express my gratitude for your many messages of good wishes following my election, as well as those expressing condolence for the death of Pope Francis. Some of those messages also came from countries with which the Holy See does not have diplomatic relations, a significant sign of esteem that indicates a strengthening of mutual relations. In our dialogue, I would like us always to preserve the sense of being a family. Indeed, the diplomatic community represents the entire family of peoples, a family that shares the joys and sorrows of life and the human and spiritual values that give it meaning and direction. Papal diplomacy is an expression of the very Catholicity of the Church. In its diplomatic activity, the Holy See is inspired by a pastoral outreach that leads it not to seek privileges, but to strengthen its evangelical mission at the service of humanity. Resisting all forms of indifference, it appeals to consciences, as witnessed by the constant efforts of my venerable predecessor, ever attentive to the cry of the poor, the needy, and the marginalized, as well as to contemporary challenges ranging from the protection of creation to artificial intelligence. In addition to being a visible sign of your country's respect for the Apostolic See, your presence here today is a gift for me. It allows me to renew the Church's aspiration, and my own, to reach out and embrace all individuals and peoples on the earth, who need and yearn for truth, justice, and peace. In a certain sense, my own life experience, which has spanned North America, South America, and Europe, has been marked by this aspiration to transcend borders in order to encounter different peoples and cultures. Through the constant and patient work of the Secretariat of State, I intend to strengthen and understanding and dialogue with you and your countries, many of which I have already had the grace to visit, especially during my time as Prior General of the Augustinians. I trust that God's providence will allow me further occasions to get to know the countries from which you come and enable me to have occasions to confirm in the faith our many brothers and sisters throughout the world and to build new bridges with all people of goodwill. In our dialogue, I would like us to keep in mind three essential words that represent the pillars of the Church's missionary activity and the aim of the Holy See's diplomacy. The first word is peace. All too often we consider it a negative word, indicative only of the absence of war and conflict, since opposition is a perennial part of human nature, frequently leading us to live in a constant state of conflict at home, at work, and in society. Peace then appears simply as a respite, a pause between one dispute and another. Given that no matter how hard we try, tensions will always be present, a little like embers burning beneath the ashes, ready to ignite at any moment. From a Christian perspective, but also in other religious traditions, peace is first and foremost a gift. It is the first gift of Christ. My peace I give to you. Yet it is an active and demanding gift. It engages and challenges each of us, regardless of our cultural background or religious affiliation, demanding first of all that we work on ourselves. Peace is built in the heart and from the heart, by eliminating pride and vindictiveness and carefully choosing our words. For words, too, not only weapons, can wound and even kill. In this regard, I believe that religions and interreligious dialogue can make a fundamental contribution to fostering an environment of peace. This naturally requires full respect for religious freedom in every country, since religious experience is an essential dimension of the human person. Without it, it is difficult, if not impossible, to bring about the purification of the heart necessary for building peaceful relationships. This effort, in which all of us are called to take part, can begin to eliminate the root causes of all conflicts and every destructive urge for conquest. It demands a genuine willingness to engage in dialogue, inspired by the desire to communicate rather than clash. As a result, there is a need to give new life to multilateral diplomacy and to those international institutions conceived and designed primarily to remedy eventual disputes within the international community. Naturally, there must also be a resolve to halt the production of instruments of destruction and death, since as Pope Francis noted in his last Urbi et Orbi message, no peace is possible without true disarmament, and the requirement that every people provide for its own defense must not turn into a race to rearmament. The second word is justice. Working for peace requires acting justly. As I have already mentioned, I chose my name thinking first of all of Leo XIII, the Pope of the first great social encyclical, Rerum Novarum. As an aside, that encyclical is now live on this channel, a new recording of it today. You should go check it out. In this time of epochal change, the Holy See cannot fail to make its voice heard in the face of the many imbalances and injustices that lead not least to unworthy working conditions and increasingly fragmented and conflict-ridden societies. Every effort should be made to overcome global inequalities between opulence and destitution that are carving deep divides between continents, countries, and even within individual societies. It is the responsibility of government leaders to work to build harmonious and peaceful civil societies. This can be achieved above all by investing in the family, founded upon the stable union between a man and a woman, a small but genuine society, and prior to all civil society. In addition, no one is exempted from striving to ensure respect for the dignity of every person, especially the most frail and vulnerable, from the unborn to the elderly, from the sick to the unemployed, citizens and immigrants alike. My own story is that of a citizen, the descendant of immigrants who in turn chose to emigrate. All of us in the course of our lives can find ourselves healthy or sick, employed or unemployed, living in our native land or in a foreign country, yet our dignity always remains unchanged. It is the dignity of a creature willed and loved by God. The third word is truth. Truly peaceful relationships cannot be built, also within the international community, apart from truth, where words take on ambiguous and ambivalent connotations, and the virtual world, with its altered perception of reality, takes over unchecked. It is difficult to build authentic relationships, since the objective and real premises of communication are lacking. For her part, the Church can never be exempted from speaking the truth about humanity and the world, resorting whenever necessary to blunt language that may initially create misunderstanding. Yet truth can never be separated from charity, which always has as its root a concern for the life and well-being of every man and woman. Furthermore, from the Christian perspective, truth is not the affirmation of abstract and disembodied principles, but an encounter with the person of Christ himself, alive in the midst of community of believers. Truth then does not create division, but rather enables us to confront all the more resolutely the challenges of our time, such as migration, the ethical use of artificial intelligence, and the protection of our beloved planet Earth. These are challenges that require commitment and cooperation on the part of all, since no one can think of facing them alone. Dear ambassadors, my ministry has begun in the heart of a Jubilee year, devoted in a particular way to hope. It is time of conversion and renewal, and above all, an opportunity to leave conflicts behind and embark on a new path, confident that by working together, each of us in accordance with his or her own sensibilities and responsibilities can build a world in which everyone can lead an authentic human life in truth, justice, and peace. It is my hope that this will be the case everywhere, starting with those places that suffer most grievously, like that country in Eastern Europe that's at the heart of a war, and the Holy Land. Thank you all for your work you are doing to build bridges between your countries and the Holy See. And I cordially impart my blessing to you, your families, and your peoples. Thank you for all the work that you do. Now, some people don't like that message much, even though they acknowledge the statement that wasn't controversial until, in the grand scheme of things, about last week, that traditional marriage and families are the foundation, the building block of society. They exist prior to the state and have more rights than the state. That's right out of Leo the 13th, right out of Rerum Novarum. But there's a lot of people don't like that statement because there's a lot of what I would call Vatican II boilerplate in it. The care for our common home and ecumenical dialogue, the latter of two, which is the most concerning for me. But every single pope since like 1958 has been on the ecumenical dialogue train. And anybody expecting otherwise at this point from anybody who would have walked out on that loggia they're frankly confused about the nature of things and how likely you are to get a hardcore traditionalist realignment to the church. Now, I don't think that statement, anything he said there, was controversial in the last 60 years of the church kind of way. But boy, were some of the media quietly seething. And so here we get into a sensitive area, according to YouTube. So we have to be careful about how we talk about this because YouTube will drop the hammer on me for simply using widely accepted mainstream terminology because it's happened multiple times in the past. So we must be cautious. Let's get to the media response. We'll start with the Chicago Sun-Times from the Holy Father's own hometown. And I don't know why this is controversial. Headline, Pope Leo affirms marriage between man and woman, but some Chicago Catholics hope for James Martin type outreach. They are still hoping that he will keep going on with the Francis style outreach and that he will be more open to things the way Francis did it with time. I'm going to go over this full article here and then just segments of other articles from secular media because you're going to see a common theme here, an attempt to undermine his authority by showing how differently Francis did things. And boy, howdy, was he so popular for doing things. Don't you want to be popular, Holy Father? Don't you want the esteem of the world? That's what's going on here. They're seething, but they can't go after him directly, partially because of how popular the Holy Father is. And they've sensed the sea change I mentioned in my video yesterday that's happening in the culture. There's been what some call a vibe shift happening in the culture. And the media have picked up on this, and they don't know what to do about it. Here's the article. Quote, Pope Leo XIV affirmed a core teaching of the Catholic Church Friday, family is founded on the stable union between a man and a woman. But some Chicago Catholics still hope Leo will continue outreach to the James Martin community that was a hallmark of Pope Francis's papacy. Catherine Abel, co-founder of Affirmed, a ministry based at St. Clement's Parish in Lincoln Park that welcomes James Martin's favorite type of Catholics, said she felt, quote, a little bit of my heart sinking because it is something you don't want to hear. Odd sentiment for a Catholic to have. She still hopes that the Pope will signal greater acceptance of the James Martin community with time. She noted that Francis took months until he famously said, "Who am I to judge them?" when asked about priests with unnatural inclinations in 2013. It took another decade before Francis allowed priests to bless the disordered pairings. Leo hasn't addressed the subject head-on yet, Abel said. It's something he won't change on a whim. There's still room, and I'm just kind of waiting on bated breath. She's right there. He is not going to undo fiducia supplicans anytime soon. Not directly. He may undo it eventually, but he's not going to go in there with act like a whirlwind and just throw out everything Francis did. I hate to be the bearer of bad news here. But it's important to note that Francis did not change the church's stance on the James Martin's parody of holy matrimony, says Rick Garcia, who directs Catholic advocates for James Martin type rights in the 80s and 90s, and also co-founded Equality Illinois, a James Martin advocacy group. Francis did not change the teaching of the church. He changed the way we look at people and the way we treat them with dignity, Garcia said. The question Garcia said is, will he be like Francis and talk about the inherent dignity of people who have these inclinations and are confused about the immutable nature of reality? Or will he be focused on their body parts and what they do with them? He goes on. It goes on like that. What an odd response from self-described Catholics. Very strange stuff. And again, this is from the Chicago Sun-Times. Okay? So again, they're quietly seething and they can't handle this. We also get this one from another outlet in Chicago, WGN-TV. Headline, Pope Leo XIV affirms family is based on union between a man and woman. Unborn has inherent dignity. The article is written by somebody calling herself Nicole Winfield from the Associated Press. This article has been republished on a lot of mainstream news websites. And I know because I spent a lot of time looking at these over the last couple days. This is what you would expect. And here's how they they go over what everything the Holy Father said. And then this is where they begin to undercut the Holy Father's authority by comparing him to Pope Francis, who was, golly gee willikers, oh so popular. Don't you want to be popular, Holy Father? Quote, Pope Francis strongly reaffirmed core Catholic teaching opposing this sacrifice to Moloch and the other kind of sacrifice to Moloch, the one involving older people, saying they were evidence of today's throwaway culture. But he also made reaching out to James Martin-type Catholics a hallmark, insisting they are welcome in the church. He never changed church doctrine, defining marriage as a union as such, and James Martin acts as intrinsically disordered. As the then head of the Augustinian order, the Reverend Robert Prevost in 2012 criticized the James Martin lifestyle and the role of mass media in promoting acceptance of the unnatural relationships that conflicted with Catholic doctrine. A decade later, during Francis's pontificate, he acknowledged Francis's call for a more inclusive church and said he didn't want people excluded just on the basis of their lifestyle. End quote. So there's an attempt to make it seem like he'll be more open to things. I did suggest the other day when talking about this question, he may have been doing the thing that every cardinal was going to do. You don't oppose the Holy Father in public. You just don't do it. This is why Burke was never going to be Pope once he issued the dubia. This is why Cardinal Sarah was never going to be Pope once he signed one of the dubia that came later. This is why any of your favorite cardinals and bishops have zero chance of being Pope, simply because they went after the Holy Father publicly. It's forbidden. You don't do it. It destroys any chances you have in a future conclave, which is kind of ironic if you think about it. Well, let's go to the activist media, specifically media outlets specifically dedicated to serving those with great pride how they identify with sins that cry out to heaven for justice, and made it so central to their core identity that they demand that the church and the world change to accommodate them. These are the media outlets that James Martin absolutely loves and modeled some of his own work after. So we go here to some outfit calling itself The Advocate, and I'm gonna have to be a little bit careful here, not because of the content of what they say as much, but because of the kind of ads they run on their website. I may have to, find a way to go over the article without you seeing them, because some of these websites run some pretty scandalous ads. So I was really shocked, even though I shouldn't have been. The headline, Pope Leo XIV says marriage is between a man and a woman. The new Pope made the statement in a private meeting with the Vatican diplomatic corps. Now, it was a private meeting, yes, but then the Vatican released what he had to say to the public, probably knowing the kind of reaction it would get. Here's how they frame this story. Pope Leo XIV has begun his papacy by affirming that the family is founded upon the stable union between a man and a woman, the Associated Press reports. Remember that Associated Press article I just referenced. The new pope made the remark Friday during a private meeting with the Vatican diplomatic corps. A transcript was released to the public. While his immediate predecessor, the late Pope Francis, was friendlier to the James Martin crowd than other popes, Francis did not change Roman Catholic doctrine on marriage and adhere to the traditional definition of families. He did announce in late 2023 that the church would allow the blessings of such pairings, but said these ceremonies should not resemble weddings. He also said the blessings were for people in the relationship, not the relationship itself. Depends how you read that document, it really does. Pope Leo, then Cardinal Robert Prevost, did not fully endorse nor reject the concept according to a College of Cardinals report. Allowing the blessings is one of several pro-James Martin type reforms Francis made during his papacy. But the new pope has made some anti-James Martin type statements. In 2012, at a meeting of bishops, he lamented that Western news media and popular culture foster sympathy for beliefs and practices that are at odds with the gospel, the New York Times reports. He specifically mentioned the James Martin lifestyle and alternative families composed of unnatural pairings and their adopted children. As Bishop of Chiclayo, Peru, he objected to a plan to teach about gender in school, saying the promotion of this ideology is confusing because it seeks to create these that don't exist. However, he has voiced compassion for the James Martin community, according to the Midas Touch Network. But while he may foster a more welcoming environment, he's not signaled any openness to changing church teaching on this parody of holy matrimony or the ordination of women. Odd how those two are linked at the hip, isn't it? Something further made clear in the meeting with the diplomatic corps. But during Francis's pontificate, he acknowledged Francis's call for more an inclusive church and said he didn't want people excluded just on the basis of lifestyle. And it goes on. And they really are quietly seething about this because they thought they had the Catholic Church, on their side. That's not the only one, though. Another website whose name I can't even say on YouTube runs the same exact headline, even though it's written by a different author. Let's just go to the next one here. It's amazing, really. Different author, same headline. Weird how that works. Now, you're going to see here another attempt to undermine the authority of the Holy Father. We'll jump down to where they do that. Quote, while Francis never sought to change church doctrine defining marriage as a union between a man and a woman or abandoning the church's position that such questionable activities are intrinsically disordered, he did reach out to James Martin Catholics and encouraged their inclusion in the life of the church. Who am I to judge? Francis famously asked when questioned about priests with weird inclinations early in his pontificate. In 2023, the Pope sanctioned the blessings of these kinds of couples. In a video presentation that serviced following his election by the conclave last week, then Bishop Robert Prevost bemoaned the James Martin lifestyle at a gathering of the World Synod of Bishops in 2012. Western mass media is extraordinarily effective in fostering within the general public enormous sympathy for beliefs and practices that are at odds with the gospel, Prevost said, calling out the lifestyle in question specifically. And it goes on. You notice how these articles are almost exactly written the same, but not. It's as if a memo went out to all the organizations to write the same article and publish them on their various websites. Weird how that works out. I'll give you another example here. This is, I think, possibly the funniest one that I've seen, because this one zeroes in on the concept that people are divided about what he said. I don't see how that this is how people are divided, but they here focus on the division caused by the Holy Father. That's an interesting take because I haven't seen very many people outside of the Mockingbird press agitated or divided over this. Have you seen people divided and agitated over this? Let me know. Mostly I've seen people who are celebrating, but most of us exist in bubbles. But do you know people who are agitated by what you saw? Headline, everything Pope Leo XIV has said about marriage and the sacrifice to Moloch in first official speech as people left divided. The newly elected Pope Leo has a controversial take on what a family should look like. Controversial take. It's the same thing the church has been teaching since the upper room. Whenever it's come up, people didn't really question the natures of the most basic structure of society until fairly recently. But when the church has been told that when the church has found that it has to defend that this is taught the same thing. Quote, Pope Leo has addressed the controversial Catholic issues of marriage and the sacrifice to Moloch for the first time since being elected, and people have been left divided. It was announced earlier this month that Robert Francis Prevost would be the new head of the Catholic Church and will be known as Pope Leo XIV. The Chicago-born Pope has already had his first official mass in the new role, but things seem to be getting slightly more challenging for him as he starts to address Catholic controversies that date back centuries, namely marriage and the sacrifice to Moloch. Is anybody getting the feeling that things are getting more challenging for him? I have not gotten that sense at all. But again, this is crafting an alternative worldview here. The Catholic Church believes in a principle known as the sanctity of life, which suggests that every human was made in God's image. The Pope addressed for this reason and others, they are categorically against the sacrifice to Moloch and the other kind of sacrifice to Moloch, but they also have strong opinions what a traditional family looks like. Pope Leo addressed these issues for the first time earlier on 16th of May. While his predecessor, Pope Francis, was viewed as one of the most progressive popes of recent history, Leo's views are very straightforward. AP News reports that the pontiff declared that a family is founded on a stable union between a man and a woman, a statement which quite clearly excludes any non-heteronormative relationships. And that is an activist word, meaning relationships that don't conform to nature. It's an activist word that normal people just don't use. He also declared that the unborn and elderly enjoy dignity as God's creatures, referencing the clear Catholic teaching on the sanctity of life. People have been left divided over his comments from earlier today, with some suggesting they are outdated and others suggesting that they're just traditionally Catholic. He is the Pope after all. One user online said, "Dear Pope, mixed marriages should now be recognized." Now that's interesting. I come from a generation where that phrase did not mean what this person here means. They mean like James Martin type parodies of holy matrimony. When I was coming up in the world, when I was, coming of age, that was a term made by people who were of different ethnicities being married together or different races. That's what it meant. And the church does recognize those, and in fact was probably the first institution in the West that did recognize them. Another added, "No God worth worshiping would want its people to stay in an abusive or damaging relationship. Neither would it want a child to be born of suffering." You don't understand anything about God then if you believe that. While others saw a different side. Well, a pope who reads and believes the word of God, how refreshing, one user noted. Hardly a surprise, another said. End quote. Now you see there what they're basing this entire narrative of being divided on. A few comments on their social media posts. But have you in the real world seen people divided? I have not. This seems to be more commonplace than common sense than most people want to admit. Now, here is a screenshot from another activist media outlet. You won't be surprised by this one. Pope Leo XIV just said no to equality of holy matrimony. New Pope statements on marriage and the James Martin crowd's so-called rights give pause to those hoping for a more inclusive church. Obviously, I changed a little bit what they were saying. These people are shameless. And it's just, again, the seething out there is fantastic, and I'm all here for it. But this does beg a question. What will the Holy Father do about Fiducia Supplicans and other documents like Amoris Laetitia that Francis promulgate that undermined Catholic morality? This is an open question, and I maintain he will do nothing immediately. And if he does anything, it'll be slowly. But I ultimately, just like you, don't know what he will actually do. None of us does know, but I think that what Father Gerald Murray here said on an interview with Joe McLean on his show is a good indicator of what needs to be done. So I'm going to show you a slightly modified one of these. All right. Here is what we're talking about here. Here is that clip from Joe McLean.
To roll back Fiducia Supplicans and Amoris Laetitia. The main and principal job of the Roman pontiff is to confirm the brethren in the faith, which means to strengthen them in professing what is true Catholic teaching, not error or innovations that are erroneous and undermine Catholic teaching. So the notion that Pope Francis put forward that those who become a couple, which means that they enter into a relationship, that they as couples are blessable by a priest, this is a notion repugnant to Catholic doctrine. We do not bless sin. And the odd thing is, of course, Pope Francis had, before Fiducia Supplicans, a year and a half previously, had authorized the publication of a document from the Congregation of the Doctrine of the Faith saying we do not bless sin, rejecting pressure for blessing couples. So you don't have to go too far back to say we're going to return to what the Doctrine of the Faith said and we're going to abolish Fiducia Supplicans. And that's an act of real charity because it's telling people who are in relationships, the church loves you so much that we're going to rebuke the sin you've entered into to call you to repentance. Because, you're what's at stake here is your eternal salvation. So that is, of course, what needs to be done. Same with Amoris Laetitia. That document, the 8th chapter in particular, is regrettable. We do not allow people who are in adulterous relationships to receive Holy Communion because adultery is a mortal sin. And people who enter into such relationships publicly are not given Holy Communion. Pope Francis changed that. That has to go back. We can't continue that. Likewise, the moral theology in the 8th chapter of Amoris Laetitia has to be rejected because it essentially says that at times, for some people, the commandments of God's law are impossible, and God doesn't expect obedience. That's repugnant. That is something that has to be removed. So those are two things I start with. The third one, you can guess, Latin Mass liberation. We just talked about that. A fourth thing would be that we should reaffirm that salvation is uniquely found in Jesus Christ, and that other religions are attempts to find God and to discover pathways of union with God, but that God has revealed the one pathway, his son, Jesus
Amen.
Christ. So the notion that other religions are pathways to God, no. They are attempts by people to find the pathway. The real pathway, the only pathway, is Christ himself.
Let's try that again. That is controversial stuff for some reason. I don't know why it is. For some people, they absolutely loved the changes to the faith that were made in the last pontificate, to the point, and it was either changes to the practice. Lip service played to the teaching changes to the practice. Well, the underlying teaching of that God does not ask the impossible of us was changed. And there will be people who will have a wildly disordered response if that were to happen. You know it as well as I do that if Amoris Laetitia were overturned, more likely it's going to be amended. That's probably what's going to happen. It'd be easier to amend it than overturn it. And if it is overturned, you will see people lose their minds absolutely. Curious what Jeannie says. I hope Bergoglio gets declared an anti-pope in our lifetime. Nothing that Pope Leo XIV has said or done indicates in any way that he will even consider it. All right, folks. I'm curious what you have to say about this, though. Let me know in the comments, please. Hit like and subscribe if you haven't. And thanks. It does help. And thanks, by the way, for your patience during my internet problems at the beginning of this. And as always, pray for the Church and the Holy Father, because they are coming for him now. The honeymoon for him from the media is over. Traditionalists and traditionally minded Catholics and those who suffered under Pope Francis are still giving him a chance and are very jubilant and happy with mostly what they see, and understand that the things he says that we don't like so much have more to do with the reflection of the post-Vatican II period, and that you were not going to get somebody on who was ultra-traditionalist, and that it's a work in progress. But pray for him and pray for the Church. I'm Anthony Stine. Ave Maria.